It started like any ordinary summer evening in Maplewood, Pennsylvania. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the small town, and 16-year-old Emily Sanders was laughing with her friends at the neighborhood barbecue. She had always been full of life, energetic, curious, and fearless. That night, she wore her favorite denim jacket and had a mischievous grin as she joked with the older kids. Her parents, Mark and Susan Sanders, watched from the porch, exchanging a glance that spoke volumes of pride and love. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Emily decided to grab one last soda from the corner of the yard. Her friends were distracted with a game of cornhole, and the music from the old jukebox drowned out most sounds. No one noticed when she wandered just beyond the barbecue lights, toward the tree line that bordered the nearby creek. Moments later, a scream echoed faintly in the distance, but when everyone turned, there was nothing, just the quiet rustling of the trees and the fading hum of laughter. Emily had vanished, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Her friends called out frantically, their voices cracking with panic. "Emily, where are you?" But the only response was the whisper of the wind. At first, some thought it was a prank. Emily had always been known for her playful tricks. But as the minutes dragged on with no sign of her, laughter turned into fear. The party dissolved into chaos, with neighbors joining the search, flashlights slicing through the growing darkness, and everyone calling her name over and over. But Emily was nowhere to be found. The police arrived within the hour, combing the surrounding woods, the creek, and even nearby abandoned sheds. They questioned every friend, every neighbor, and reviewed every detail of the evening. But no matter how thorough the investigation, there were no clues, no footprints leading away, no struggle, no indication that she had left voluntarily. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air, leaving only the faint echo of her laughter behind. Rumors began to swirl. Had she run away, or was something more sinister at play? By nightfall, Maplewood was gripped with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Flyers with Emily's photo were plastered on every telephone pole and storefront, pleading for information. The local news covered the story, calling it the vanishing of Emily Sanders, and the town held its collective breath. Her parents refused to accept the reality of her disappearance, clinging desperately to hope, while Emily's friends replayed the moments over and over, wondering if they had missed some small, critical sign. Everyone in town knew one thing. They had witnessed something terrifying, unexplainable, and haunting, and Emily Sanders had vanished without a trace. From the moment Emily Sanders disappeared, the town of Maplewood seemed to hold its breath. The first days were frantic. Neighbors, friends, and volunteers combed the surrounding forests, the winding creek beds, and even the abandoned warehouses on the outskirts of town. Flashlights pierced the thickening dusk as shouts of Emily echoed across empty streets. Police vehicles roared down side roads, sirens slicing through the quiet summer nights. But no matter how many people searched, no trace of Emily was ever found. Each dead end only added to the gnawing fear that something far more sinister had happened than a simple runaway. Mark Sanders refused to sit idle. Every morning, he rose before sunrise, checking areas that had been searched the day before, convinced he might find her hiding spot. He went door to door, speaking with anyone who might have seen something unusual. At times, he'd follow a fleeting lead, chasing the shadow of a girl matching Emily's description across empty parking lots or abandoned fields, only to find nothing but the wind and the whisper of leaves. Every time, his hope grew a little thinner, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that haunted his every waking moment. The police tried to reassure the Sanders family, but even their reassurances were hollow. They questioned neighbors, friends, and anyone who had been in the area that evening, but no one could provide answers. Witnesses contradicted one another, creating a confusing web of vague sightings and unverified rumors. Some claimed to see Emily near the creek that night. Others swore they spotted a girl running along the edge of town. Yet, when authorities investigated these leads, they led nowhere. Empty trails, cold streets, and the ever-present feeling that Emily had simply disappeared into thin air. As the weeks turned into months, the story captured the attention of the media. Flyers, newspaper articles, and television reports spread Emily's face across the state. The disappearance that haunted Maplewood became a headline that sent chills through anyone who read it. Volunteers from neighboring towns joined the search parties, hiking miles of forest trails and inspecting abandoned homes. Despite the growing numbers and the intensity of the search, Emily remained elusive. Her absence became a dark cloud over Maplewood, a haunting reminder that something unexplainable had occurred. Mark Sanders' life became consumed with the search. Nights were the worst, as he lay awake imagining Emily trapped somewhere, calling out for help that no one could hear. Friends and family tried to offer support, but the Sanders' grief was isolating, like a heavy fog surrounding them. Mark documented every lead, every clue, and every possible sighting, convinced that even the smallest detail could lead to her. But each day ended the same: empty roads, silent woods, and the haunting realization that the girl he loved had vanished without a trace, leaving the town and his heart suspended in a state of desperate, unending fear. By the year 2000, 3 years had passed since Emily Sanders vanished, and life in Maplewood had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The town carried a quiet, uneasy tension, as if everyone feared that the next disappearance could be theirs. Emily's bedroom remained frozen in time, a shrine to the life that had been abruptly stolen. Her posters still lined the walls, her favorite books stacked neatly on the shelves, and her clothes hung untouched in the closet. For Mark and Susan Sanders, walking past that room was both comforting and unbearable, a daily reminder of what was missing and what could never be replaced. The void left by Emily's disappearance began to infiltrate every corner of her family's life. Her parents struggled to maintain their routines, but even the simplest moments were tainted by absence. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries were no longer joyful celebrations. They had become painful reminders of what was lost. Mark, once a jovial, outgoing man, became withdrawn and silent, consumed by memories and what ifs. His nights were haunted by dreams of Emily wandering alone, calling for help that never came. Each morning, he awoke to the crushing reality that time was slipping away, and yet Emily remained missing. Friends and neighbors, initially supportive, began to drift away as the years went by. Conversations about Emily grew awkward, as if mentioning her name reopened a wound too raw for them to face. Maplewood itself seemed to slowly forget, moving on with its daily life, while the Sanders family remained trapped in a limbo of grief and unanswered questions. Susan Sanders tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, volunteering at community events and supporting local charities, but behind her smile was a constant ache. Every laugh felt hollow, every cheerful moment shadowed by the absence of her daughter. Mark Sanders' obsession with finding Emily only intensified. He meticulously documented every rumor, every possible sighting, and every unexplained occurrence that might be connected to her disappearance. Nights were spent driving the same empty roads, scanning the edges of forests, abandoned houses, and fields where Emily might have wandered. Every time he spotted a fleeting shadow or a figure that might be her, hope surged, only to be crushed when it turned out to be nothing. Sleep became a rare luxury, and the line between hope and despair blurred until it felt almost impossible to tell the difference. Despite the passing years, a fragile thread of hope never fully disappeared. The Sanders family clung to the possibility that Emily was still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. It became a part of their identity, an unspoken vow to never give up, no matter how many false leads or dead ends they faced. But life in limbo is exhausting, both physically and emotionally. The world moved on around them, oblivious to the silent suffering that lingered in the Sanders home. Each day was a struggle to maintain a semblance of normal life, all while carrying the weight of a mystery that had no answers, and no end in sight. Even as years passed, Emily Sanders remained a ghost in the minds of Maplewood residents. Rumors began to circulate, whispers of a girl with familiar eyes appearing in the most unexpected places. At first, these were dismissed as coincidences or mistaken identities, a teenager who simply resembled Emily. But the sightings persisted, growing stranger with each passing year. People swore they had seen her near the old gas station on Route 45, her figure barely visible behind the dim glow of a flickering neon sign. Others claimed she appeared at local parks late at night, wandering silently, as if searching for something or someone. Mark Sanders, desperate for any lead, never ignored these reports. He treated each sighting with the gravity of a possible clue, driving miles at a time, hoping to finally find his daughter. On more than one occasion, he would rush to a location, heart pounding, only to arrive and see nothing but empty streets and shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. Still, he refused to give up. Each fleeting glimpse, each whispered rumor, was a lifeline, a fragile thread he clung to in a world that had long abandoned hope. The sightings weren't always in public spaces. Some came from neighbors who swore they had glimpsed Emily from their windows late at night, standing silently in the yard or peering from behind trees. Each account was eerily similar, barefoot, pale, with the same distant expression that seemed to stare right through anyone who met her gaze. But when people tried to approach her, she would vanish without a trace, leaving only the unsettling feeling that someone, or something, was watching them. Maplewood began to grow uneasy, as if Emily's disappearance had opened a door to something the town couldn't comprehend. Local law enforcement tried to rationalize the stories, attributing them to grief, overactive imaginations, or the natural human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But for Mark Sanders, the experiences were undeniable. He began keeping meticulous notes, tracking dates, times, and locations, looking for patterns that could reveal where Emily might be hiding, or who might be keeping her from returning. With each passing year, the sightings became less like rumors and more like pieces of a puzzle that refused to be solved, a puzzle that had the power to unravel the very fabric of the small town he called home. Despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a growing sense of anticipation, a dark, uneasy energy that seemed to follow every report. The townspeople couldn't explain why these fleeting glimpses of Emily happened now, decades after her disappearance, or why they seemed to intensify in certain areas. Some whispered that she was trying to communicate, that these appearances were a warning, or perhaps a cry for help from a world beyond their understanding. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear: Emily Sanders was no longer just a memory or a missing person in the eyes of Maplewood. She had become a living mystery, a haunting presence that refused to be ignored. It was a grey, overcast morning in the spring of 2024 when Mark Sanders' phone rang, a sound that would change everything in an instant. On the other end was the somber voice of a funeral home director, delivering news that sent a cold shiver down his spine. His estranged brother, Richard, had passed unexpectedly overnight. Mark had not spoken to Richard in years. Old arguments, buried grudges, and unspoken words had kept them apart. But now, he was being called to a funeral, a gathering meant for mourning, unaware that this day would also bring a terror he could never have imagined. As Mark prepared for the funeral, an uneasy feeling settled deep in his chest. Something about the call felt wrong, as if it carried more than just the news of death. Every step he took, every mile he drove toward the church, was heavy with a sense of foreboding. The sky mirrored his anxiety, a blanket of dark clouds pressing down over Maplewood. Neighbors noticed him driving slowly, hands gripping the wheel, eyes darting to shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally along the roadside. For the first time in decades, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this funeral might not be just about Richard. The church was quiet when Mark arrived, a somber hush settling over the gathered mourners. Friends and family whispered condolences, but their words were hollow, their faces drawn with the effort to mask discomfort. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped inside, scanning the familiar wooden pews and the small chapel that had witnessed so many milestones in his life. Each footstep echoed through the room, mingling with the soft murmur of mourners. But beneath the grief, a deeper unease took hold, a sensation that someone, or something, was waiting, watching, just beyond his perception. As he took his seat, Mark's eyes were drawn to the front of the chapel, toward the casket, where the lifeless form of his brother lay. The room felt colder than it should have, the shadows darker, deeper. There was a stillness that was almost unnatural, as if the air itself was holding its breath. He noticed small details he hadn't before, a slight creak in the floorboards, a flicker of movement in the corner of the room, almost imperceptible, like a shadow slipping across the walls. Every instinct screamed that something was about to happen, something that would shatter the fragile sense of normalcy he had clung to for years. Mark's unease grew with every passing minute, mingling with memories of the years he had spent searching for Emily. He could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, the long nights, the dead ends, the whispers of sightings that had come to nothing. And then, as the mourners whispered prayers and the organ played softly in the background, an unexplainable sound made the hair on his neck stand on end. The door at the back of the chapel creaked slowly, too slowly to be casual. Every head turned, hearts pounding, and for a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. In that moment, Mark Sanders knew, with a certainty that made his blood run cold, that this funeral would not be ordinary, and that the past had just walked back into his life. Then it happened. The chapel doors creaked open slowly, a sound so deliberate it seemed almost unnatural. The room fell into a stunned silence, the murmurs of the mourners dying mid-sentence. Every eye turned toward the entrance, but no one could have prepared for what they saw. There, standing in the doorway, barefoot and pale, was Emily Sanders. She looked exactly as she had the day she vanished, frozen in time, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders, her expression blank, yet piercing. The air seemed to thicken as she stepped forward, each footfall eerily silent on the wooden floorboards. Mark Sanders' heart stopped. It felt as though the years of grief, despair, and relentless searching had led to this singular, impossible moment. He stared, unable to breathe, as his daughter walked slowly down the aisle toward him. Her gaze was distant, almost otherworldly, and for a heartbeat, Mark thought he might be hallucinating. Friends and family stared in disbelief, some whispering frantic questions to each other, others frozen in shock. Nobody could understand how this girl, missing for 27 years, had suddenly appeared in the center of their small-town funeral. The atmosphere in the chapel shifted from grief to a palpable tension. Whispers of disbelief spread through the crowd, but no one dared move toward her. Emily's presence was magnetic and terrifying at the same time, as if she carried the weight of decades spent some way unknown, some way unimaginable. The sunlight filtering through the stained glass seemed to catch on her hair in strange, flickering patterns, casting shadows that danced unnaturally across the walls. Every step she took felt measured, deliberate, and heavy with meaning, though no one could tell what that meaning was. Emily's eyes met her father's, and for the first time, a flicker of recognition passed through them. Mark felt a jolt that was almost physical, a mixture of joy, fear, and disbelief that made his knees weak. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her close, but something in her posture stopped him. She was here, but not entirely. There was a distance in her gaze, a shadow that hinted at horrors endured in the years they had been apart. Every instinct Mark had told him to tread carefully, that this was not just a joyful reunion, but the culmination of a mystery that still held unspeakable danger. As Emily moved closer to the casket, her voice broke the silence, soft, almost a whisper, but carrying a weight that shook the room. She spoke words that only her father could hear, words that froze him in place. "I couldn't leave, they were watching me." The entire chapel seemed to shiver at the sound, as though the air itself had been poisoned by the revelation. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to ripple unnaturally, and for a fleeting moment, Mark realized that Emily's disappearance had never truly ended. Something had kept her hidden, something that still lingered, watching, waiting, and now, after 27 years, it had returned with her. The words Emily whispered to her father hung in the air like a dark storm cloud. "I couldn't leave, they were watching me." Mark's mind raced, trying to comprehend what she meant. Who had been watching her for 27 years? And why now, after all this time, had she returned? The room felt charged, alive with a strange, almost malevolent energy. Shadows shifted in unnatural ways, flickering across the walls and ceiling, as if something unseen was moving just beyond the edges of the mourner's vision. The peaceful solemnity of the funeral had been shattered, replaced by an invisible tension that gripped everyone in the chapel. Emily's eyes darted toward the corners of the room, and Mark followed her gaze, sensing the unspoken danger. She seemed tense, as if the very air around her was thick with something sinister. For years, the town had whispered rumors, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality. Whatever had kept Emily hidden all this time wasn't just human. It was something else, something that lingered, patient and calculating. Mark's chest tightened as he realized that her disappearance had been more than a tragedy. It had been a warning, a secret carefully concealed for decades. The mourners tried to look away, some murmuring reassurances to themselves, others clutching each other in fear. Yet, the feeling of being watched intensified, pressing down on the room with a nearly tangible weight. Emily's lips trembled as she began to speak again, her voice barely audible but quivering with urgency. She hinted at strange places she had been confined, of rooms with no windows, and of people, or things, that never allowed her a moment of peace. Every word painted a picture of terror so vivid that Mark could feel it, almost like a cold hand clutching his own heart. Mark took a cautious step forward, desperate for answers. But Emily stopped him, her gaze locking onto his with a warning that sent a shiver down his spine. She tried to explain the unimaginable, the threats, the shadows, the invisible chains that had kept her tethered. It was clear she had endured horrors that no child should ever face, horrors that had left marks not only on her body but on her very spirit. The room seemed to darken further, the air thick with anticipation, as if whatever had held her captive was aware that she was no longer alone, and it was watching, calculating, waiting. For the first time, the other mourners began to sense it too, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the feeling that eyes unseen were observing their every move. A low, almost imperceptible hum seemed to vibrate through the chapel, resonating with a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. Emily's presence was no longer just a miraculous return. It was a harbinger of a deeper, darker reality. Mark realized, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the answers he had been seeking for decades were only the beginning. Whatever had held Emily captive, whatever had controlled the shadows of her life, had not vanished. It had returned with her, lurking silently in the corners, waiting for its next move. As the mourners sat frozen, the shadows in the corners of the chapel seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Emily turned to her father one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "They are still here, and they are not done." The room grew colder, and a silence heavier than grief settled over everyone. Some felt their skin crawl, some their hearts pound, as if unseen eyes were scanning each of them. Mark reached for her, trembling, but the sense of danger held him back. The miraculous return of his daughter had brought more questions than answers, and the dark secret of her disappearance still hung like a storm cloud over them all. Then, as quickly as it had begun, Emily's expression shifted, calm, almost detached, and she walked toward the chapel doors. Nobody dared follow, fearing whatever had haunted her for 27 years might reach out through her. The doors closed behind her with a final, echoing thud, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. Whispers filled the room. Where had she been? What had she seen? But the truth remained locked away in Emily's haunted eyes. Mark stood frozen, staring at the spot where she had vanished, realizing something terrifying. Emily's return was only the beginning. The shadows that had held her captive were still out there, watching, waiting, and the nightmare that had haunted the Sanders family for nearly 3 decades was far from over. For the town of Maplewood, life would never be the same. And somewhere, just beyond the chapel walls, a presence lingered, silent and patient, knowing that its secret had been uncovered, but not defeated. The girl who had vanished in 1997 had returned, but the darkness that followed her had returned too. The chilling question remained, hanging over everyone like a heavy fog. How do you escape something that has been waiting for you for 27 years?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.